because it's pretty obvious they're not sure what a character is yet, and that is developmentally exactly where they're supposed to be. The world is just so full of Pixar movies and teacups that dance and sing, and but it's a very valuable skill for them to look at all the things and then compare the text to go back in and see, okay, who really were the characters? Who really acted and moved the story forward? So at this particular time, as you saw, I said no. There were no wrong answers. Everything went up there because it's the process of bringing that text together with the illustration that's important for them. Okay, so what did you see? Yeah.
One thing that resonated with me that you said that I really liked was how you pointed out that act was hiding in the word characters, because I think it just gave the kids another thing to process about what the characters actually do, that they act in the story, they make the story move, they make the story go forward. I think and then when the little boy at the end said, I think it's the cat, and you said, did you see him acting? So I could see their little brains like moving, like, yeah, I did in the pictures, even though you didn't read the words, they saw the cat doing things in the pictures. So I thought that was really cool.
And I think just it shows you could easily take one book and do it for 5 days, because I feel when we infer now, it's so much. We're talking about the characters, we're talking about the setting, we're talking about what are the actions that they're doing and everything. So it's almost like you could take one day and just infer what are the characters.
So maybe as a set for next year, though, now that you know the stories, to take that movement with one book and work on just those particular things. What I was going to ask you about is that you brought up characters and setting at the same time with them. Now, when you're doing that picture walk, could you be doing both those things since you brought it up to them first? Or after you read the text, now you got the characters, are you going to look back and now infer the setting?
Actually, it is determined by their responses. They were so confused on character that I made that monitor and adjust decision right there. And I thought, if I go into setting now, that's that beauty of monitoring and adjusting where our professional decisions come in. No, they could not handle setting. It would have been way too much, and the cognitive load would have been inappropriate instruction. So that's exactly what I would have done.
But let's just say they got characters then. Are you going to do both of them at the same time? Would you do that characters and settings since you did display it both at the same time?
I would have gone through and done all the information on characters from the illustration. Then I would have gone through and done all the information on setting.
Okay.
So I would have done the illustrations both for setting and character, or character and setting, and then gone to the text for both. Because we do too much, and their cognitive load. What it told me in there was, we are just beginning the character journey here. You look at our world, and it is very easy to see why they are confused. They named everything that was in the illustration. Now, think about when you are in a class, and you are reading something that is unfamiliar to you. Think how much you highlight. You highlight everything to be on the safe side. You can always tell, when I was teaching in high school, I could always tell the kids that were the most insecure because they had the most highlighting on the page because they were still unsure. So what we have to remember is the brain can only focus. It cannot multitask. So for me to go into setting when there was that much confusion on character would have been malpractice, an inappropriate decision. Now, you notice, if you look in your standards, it says kindergarten does setting, character, and major events. Notice I didn't touch major events at all. And there's a reason, because you really can't do major events until you know a story well. You can't do what happens, and then what happens next, and what happens next. Those are not major events. Major events are the big things. Once you know the conflict, the problem, or the goal, the major events are the big things that happen that move you towards the resolution, the reaching or the goal, or the solving of the problem.
Okay, so at the beginning of the school year, though, then as a group, it should have been maybe, now that we know, like major focus possibly on characters, the first start.
I'd suggest that for you to start next year.
By this time, they should be already being able to identify all of those, so we go to the next piece.
Your hardest piece is always gonna be major events, but it is your responsibility, it's in a standard you've chosen, and you chose it for a good reason.
And then it's hard because 4 characters, they were naming everything, and I'm trying to think of books we read this year. They don't have them, but I know like we had a book last year where it was the grass was the character, the stick was the character, the moon
Exactly.
was the character. 'Cause they
I was
all
thinking of that
Exactly.
too.
like remember that
Yes.
chicken,
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah.
So it is hard. So I can see where they would name everything because sometimes the moon is talking or the grass.
Exactly,
Mhm.
so you can't just judge it on the
Mhm.
illustration, you have to then go to the
Writing.
text. And
And
the
make-
beauty
Mhm.
is,
Then they connect.
yes, to bring the text and the illustration together. That's where the thinking, and think what level of rigor you are on. Every question that you are asking is high level. They're analyzing, they are evaluating. That is where we want these kids to be. You choose the rigor of the text. That text is perfect. And your statement just excites me. One book all week, absolutely.
And you wouldn't have to, like with every book, would you do, let's do the picture walk with the character, you know, because then it would lose that excitement.
Exactly.
So like maybe like, yeah, right away, like you say, we focus on the characters and then you do,
But every time you read, you can't do that intensity.
no.
That was an
Right.
instructional level.
Yeah.
So you read for many times. Like when I when I read, I have a process that I do with my grandkids when I read to them. But I don't do it on every book because none of
You
us
just
do
have-
that.
yeah.
We all don't read the same level of rigor in our own recreational reading. You know, so there are times when you're just going to read a story.
And just read.
Mhm.
But when you are instructing and you've got an instructional goal, that book can last all week. Actually, that book that we have in there, that's a great story. Because they'll find when they get into the book, when they get the text going, and are you using the word text or are you using the word words? The word.
I'm using
I
Do you
use-
use
I use
text?
text.
More, but
I used both, but
It's so
mostly
much.
text. I think.
That might be a discussion worth having too.
Yeah, because I don't think it
So
is text.
think about if you want to get them used to text. It doesn't matter, but it should be uniform.
Another one of those where we need to tighten up.
Yeah, yeah. And then just let the first grade know what you used. If you use text, they'll use text.
Right.
Well, and it's one of those things, do they need to know text for if they're going to be taking a test later on? Is that we're gonna say in the text, you know what I mean?
it's
Like,
so
'cause if it,
tricky because they think of texting.
they think of, yeah, they do.
So when you first
Oh
introduce
yeah.
It is,
I
yeah.
didn't even
that
think
this
about
is a
that.
text.
That's a great point. It's our world.
Because we talked about that a lot too. Sometimes it's called a text, but it's not the kind of text you do on your phone or on.
That's a
Yeah,
great
so
point. Excellent.
it's
Can I
tricky
just
for
show
them.
you this?
Is that the story map you were talking about the
Yep,
other
and I
day?
use them for, I'll just pass it on to this grouping, but I've used it all year, these story maps after our stories. And I don't know if this would be a good thing for them then, because that's what we go through, the characters, the setting, the problem, and the solution for our, and I do it for.
This is perfect.
Yeah, I've used those when you've given them to me too,
Yeah.
Christy.
This
I
is
like them.
perfect.
Do you have the kids, right, or you just do it as a whole group?
Well, I make it as part of my smart board, so I have it 5 circles and I make it, and then we do it together, they write it. And we are talking about it out loud.
That's great.
That's good writing practice too.
This is
Well,
perfect.
this is actually drawing, though.
They're
The
drawing
beauty
it.
of this
Oh,
is,
okay.
the beauty of this is that as the kids move up and more story elements are added, then the kids just add, like they'll add climax, they'll add major minor characters, you know, that by the time they get to senior high, they're so used to a story map. But what we've got right now is too many times in the districts, when I was teaching, everybody had their own favorite story map. And so the kids got used to the one from the teacher, and so they were really not unified. Find one that you all like and use it. And then share it with the first grade teachers. So that the first grade teachers, they don't have to use it, they can add one. But first grade actually does the same story elements. They are not adding any other story elements. They go into describing the characters. You identify the characters in the setting. They describe. So when I go into the lesson now in first grade, we're going to be going through a text and describing the characters. But the very first thing I've got to make sure is that they remember, activate in their brain who characters are. That they move a story forward. So Can you do a book all week? You should. Because the research that's coming out is showing that it's the repeated readings that bring the deep comprehension, because the brain cannot focus. So your observation, could you do Kitten's First Moon? Yeah. Would it be the only reading experience you'd have all week? Absolutely not. You'd have other fun.
So you read just other stories, but you wouldn't do other.
But your
you would just
instruction,
read it.
right.
On one book.
But your instruction is this, or is this, the
You could
story.
just read a story with,
This
I mean,
is
asking
perfect.
just
It's
basic
a-
questions.
Problem solution, like on that paper, the major events, that would be kind of included with
The
that.
major events are what take you from the problem to the solution.
So the problem in
So-
this story would be the kitten was really hungry and wanted milk. And at the very end, the solution would be that they would have come to the conclusion that the milk was at the house the whole time, but he thinks the moon is the milk.
So, because I like this, I like doing the problem solution, but is that technically a standard for us, or?
The major
Yes, it
events
is,
with-
because you know why?
Just
It's the
the-
only way you can get to major events.
So
If
using
the
those
kids
words
don't
is
do
good.
problem solution, then every event is the same.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is, and then you get retellings
Mm-hmm.
where kids go on and on and on.
Hmm. They retell the entire story.
Yeah, they do, because they're not sure what's important and
Or
what
they
isn't.
tell the beginning of the
So,
end.
that's the only way that you can do major events.
Mhm.
That's why story maps and things, you know, you see in the upper grades, that teachers will have students write something from each chapter that happened. Then you got a whole bunch of junk up there sometimes. You can't do a story map until you're done with the story, because you've got to know what the solution was, and then you go back, and that's where the analysis comes in with the older kids. What were the major events that led from the time that you knew the goal that needed to be reached, the problem that needed to be solved, or the conflict that needed to be resolved? Once you knew that, what were the major things that happened to reach that solution, the resolution, or the reaching of the goal? So that's why you start early. All of these things fit together so beautifully, don't they? Okay,
Do you know what I was thinking though, when we were talking about the characters, how it was kind of confusing for the kids? Because this curriculum, I noticed that we work on a lot with nouns and like verbs, how we're talking about that. Do you think they were kind of confused and thinking, like listing all the nouns? I don't know, I just kind of thought
I don't
that.
know,
I
that
think
would
they were
take,
just listing what they saw in the pictures. I really do. I
Maybe
think
they
it was
were,
just,
yeah.
it seemed like that every time something new, like the little boy who gave us such an insight into his brain when he said, bananas, no leaves. He was just citing what was new in the picture.
Just
Yeah.
trying out, so he would.
But at the
Yeah, and then
beginning
he
you
made
But
the
kind
he's
of,
connection.
really engaged
but at the
though, like,
beginning
he
you
kept
kind
on-
of said that though. Tell me what's new in the story at the time. But
Mhm.
I mean, so for them, that's what they were doing. Is what they were putting. I mean, a pole. The fact that they put the porch. But I think at the time they were just thinking anything new that they saw, they were putting on there.
Well, and I think too they were maybe thinking about the make believe part too.
Yep.
Like Janelle was
Yep.
saying, because
It's
I
their
thought about that
world.
other story too.
Absolutely.
That could be a
There is
character,
no problem
you know.
with what, because it could be.
Mm-hmm.
There is no problem with all of their guesses.
Mhm.
They did the right thing.
Now, in this story itself, because the moon plays a very important role in this story, technically, is that a make-believe character?
No. The
Because
moon
it
is not a
doesn't
character.
move it.
Doesn't do
This
anything.
cat does everything.
It's like In Search of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is not a character.
If the moon was talking,
Yes.
then it would be
Yes.
a character.
Yes.
So, would you say in order to be a character, it has to talk, or not necessarily?
I think it just has to.
Act. It could do something.
Act, just do
Right?
something.
And if it's speaking and it's
But
leading,
a tree moves, then would that be acting? Sorry, I interrupted you.
But like if it's making something happen because it's moving. Do you know what I mean?
it's part of the evolution. You want to get them to they're moving the story forward. They're moving from the problem to the resolution. Your first discussions with the kids are going to be muddy. They're not going to be clean. And you can't get there with a simple, easy way. It comes from just practice. But the biggest thing to do is to keep your focus pure. Keep that focus on just the illustrations and then the text. And they should work together to give you your answers. Just because a tree is a story